Today, I'm sharing my approach to setting up for a corporate sit-down interview. When you don't have the chance to scout the location in advance, adaptability becomes your greatest tool. By combining simple techniques with solid technical know-how, you can confidently tackle any challenges the space throws your way and create a professional, polished setup every single time. This is a simple sit-down interview with two cameras set up, one fixed and one on the slider. Now the slider gives us a dynamic look, but it comes with a challenge. We have to light a larger area since the movement reveals more of the space. So you need to make sure you have the proper equipment, especially if you're working in a darker room. Now, as you can see on this picture, there is a ton of light coming in from the window here. Like there's a window on this side, and it's flooding this space with ton of light, ton of daylight. And there's actually a window behind the camera as well, like a door, and it's letting a ton of daylight. You can also see that we have all those overhead lights on the top that we don't control. I actually have no control over any of those. And that's something we're gonna have to figure out a way to deal with. Now, I like the space. There's a ton of room. We were able to just simply move. You see the couch here. The couch was facing this way to kind of create this little area here. So we simply moved the couch out of the way. And then we had those boards in the background that we can slide kind of wherever we want. And so that was cool because it also has our client's branding on it. And we can just kind of move it into place wherever we want to frame it correctly. So we just use kind of like a stool, a high chair for our subject, and then we can deal with the space as far as creating the lighting that we want. So the main challenge here when you first come to this space is you don't have control of all this daylight coming in. And so it already dictates kind of the look that you're going to have. So in this particular instance, there is no way for me to have my subject, the person I'm going to be interviewing, brighter than the background because I can't compete against the daylight. And so we know that we're going to use the daylight and the room as our highlights. And so the first thing I'm going to do is put my false colors on my camera, on my monitor, and I'm going to do my camera setting to expose the room as the highlights. So when we look at our false color, we can see that we do have a spot that's speaking, and that's okay. That's a light that's actually in the hallway. You can see it here, and it's okay. I'm okay with it peaking because it's pure white anyway. So it's not like we're losing texture or information that's valuable to the shot. And so I'm okay with that little area kind of getting a little too bright, and that kind of helps us with the rest of the room. And so we can see that we have levels on this back wall that's going to be in the 90s and 80s IRE, which is kind of what we want for our highlights. Because what we're really trying to do here is create lighting separation. We try to have different levels for different things. So we want our highlights to be defined, we want our midtones to be defined, and we want our shadows to be defined so that in post-production, we can adjust however we want. And then it also creates a nicer look by defining those areas. And so when we look at the actual shot without the false color, we can see that this wall is our highlights, and then we have some shadows here with the furniture, and hopefully our subject is going to be the midtones. So let's go back to the false color a little bit. And so that's the first thing I'm going to do is kind of change the camera setting, adjust my camera setting to expose the shots, expose the room to the highlights. And so I'm going to keep changing my setting until I blow this out a little bit and until I get my 80s and 90s level, and then leave the rest of the room to fall into place. And if I need to, then I can add more lights in the background. And in this case, maybe I should have, maybe I could have, because you can see this back wall here is somewhere in the 60s and 50s. And I wish that was a little brighter. And so the only way to do that would have been to add a lot more lights in the background. But when you look at the shot, it looks fine. It's clean. There's just not as much separation between my subject and that particular wall. And so in post-production, that could create a little bit of issue. If I try to adjust that, then the wall is going to move with it. But that's okay. So now that we've done our camera setting, that we adjusted our camera setting to expose for the room, we're no longer going to touch our camera settings. And all we're going to do now is adjust our lighting to expose our subject to the proper level that we're looking for. Let me go back to the setup shot. And you can see, so here's that window I was telling you about, the door that's bringing all this daylight into the room. And so again, I can't compete against any of that. So if we look at our shots, this is going to be our key side, the side that's away from the camera lens. And typically you want that side to be brighter than the fill side, just so that you can create a little bit of contrast between the two. And it looks more natural because this side right here kind of plays with the idea of this daylight coming in the room from the window. And so typically your key side you want opposite from the camera. So I just placed my key light against the wall here, and same thing, using false color, I can then adjust the intensity of that light until I reach the levels that I want. And when we look at the shot on the false color, what we really want is the very brightest spot on our subject to be right around, but not more than 70 IRE. And so those light gray spot that you see here on the tip of his nose, right under his eyes, we want that to be in that 70 IRE range, but not more than that. And this is a very light-skinned person, and so we need to be careful because, you know, you adjust the light a little bit and all of a sudden, like, boom, like his whole face is gonna light up. And you can see we're a little bright here on the tip of his nose. We can see a little bit of a glare, a little bit on his cheek and a little bit underneath his eye. And that's where our 70 spot is. And so I don't want to go more than that. I probably could have put a little bit of makeup on him to just kind of tone down those little bright spots. The other thing I want to show you in this room, because we can't deal with the overhead light, I actually used a pop-up bounce right above the subject's head to eliminate as much spill from those overhead lights as possible. And I want to bring that neg as low as I possibly can. I need enough room for the boom mic to fit, but I want to keep it as low as possible so it covers as much area as possible. Now, ideally, if I had the gear, I would set up a big 8x8 or even a 4x4. That one is a little smaller. It's a 48 inches. I think it's 48. It might be a 36 inches pop-up. So if I had a 4x4 or an 8x8 frame with stand, then I can kind of block the entire area above him to eliminate against all those spill coming from that overhead light. So again, you can see it here. The chair is directly under here, and any of those lights coming through here are going to be blocked by the bounce, by the pop-up. And I want the pop-up to be on the negative side facing the person, right? I don't want, because, you know, those pop-ups are like 5-in-1 or whatever. So like on the other side of the black, it's either gold or silver or white. It's actually gold or silver. I don't want to face the gold or silver towards my subject because it will pick up any lights from the ground, from the walls, and bounce it right back towards my subject. So you want to make sure you're putting the negative side towards the subject to avoid any bouncing light coming back to their face. So once we have the exposure and our key light set properly to the level that we want on their face, again, we're trying to light up this area of his face to the levels that we want. We now need to look at contrast. And again, I'm going to use false color to then figure out the difference between my key side here and my fill side on this side. And what you want is you want a difference between the two. You want your key side to be brighter than your fill side. And depending on how big of a difference you want, that's the ratio. That's what we call the ratio, right? And so whether it's a 2-to-1 ratio or a 3-to-1 ratio, 4-to-1 ratio, whatever it is you want, that's what we're talking about, is the difference between the key side and the fill side. I typically like a very contrasty shot, but you also have to think about the type of project that you're working on, and is it on brand with the message? And in this particular case, we're not talking about anything very dramatic, right? And so we don't need something very contrasty, and we want to make sure it matches with the message. And in this particular case, if we look at the false color, we can see the difference, right? We can see here's our key side. Again, anywhere between 70 and 60. We have a little bit of like the 55 in here with this pink. And then on the other side, on the fill side, we're much darker, right? We're kind of like in this 30 area and a little bit on the 40 side, a 45 side with the green. And so that's a pretty good ratio for me. I feel like in this particular case, for that particular project, I didn't need to create a darker side. And so the two options when you're dealing with ratio, you either use a light, which I almost never do on that side, to raise the level. Like if we feel like this was too dark, you can put a light there and turn it on. To me, that becomes always too much. It's too harsh. So typically what I do is I would set up a white bounce off camera, and I would use the light from the Keylight to bounce lights back onto his fill side if I needed to raise those levels. Instead of using a harsh light, using a bounce board typically is more than enough. And then you can control the intensity of that light by bringing the bounce closer to the subject or away from the subject to limit the amount of light that's being bounced on his face. The other, if you need to take away lights, if for example, we wanted this to be darker, then our only option is to use a neg, like a black cloth or the same as the bounce that we have overhead, and do the same thing, is to get it as close as we can, obviously off camera so we don't see it, but as close as we can to avoid any bounce off of the wall. And when you look at this room, you can see that there's just white walls, bouncing lights everywhere. So lights is going to come from overhead, hit this wall, and bounce back everywhere, including our subject. And so by putting a neg here, or as close as we can, then we can limit the amounts of bounce that's coming from those walls. It's going to bounce from everything. The floor is going to bounce lights back into our subject. Even this wooden table here is going to bounce stuff. It's just really impressive how light works. And when you start using a neg, you can see how much light is actually bouncing back onto your subject. So typically, I have a tendency of using the neg more often than a bounce just because I like darker contrast. But in this case, I felt like the contrast was pretty good with our subject for what we were trying to do. So I actually didn't need to add or remove any light. That was about the right amount. You can see it on his shirt too, right? So we have our key side here. That's a little nice and bright and quite a bit darker on this side as well. So that's a good thing. We have a good contrast here. The next and last thing that I do is also set up a backlight, which we see in here a little bit. Let me show you a different angle. I think we can see it right here. So I use, or you can, sometimes you call it an edge light. And really the idea behind an edge light is to create an edge brighter around your subject to separate the subject from the background. And so by using this light and adjusting the intensity, we can then create what we see here, which is, obviously we see it quite a bit on his hair, but on his shoulder, you can see it here as well, more on the very edge of it. But it's creating that separation here, and you can see it here, mostly between this background and his shoulders here. So it's this really thin line here, and we have it here, and obviously around his head here, just to separate the two so that they don't blend in. And that becomes very important, especially when your subject is wearing clothes that matches the color of the background. Like imagine if he was wearing a black suit and we have a black background, or if he was wearing a white suit, a white shirt, for example, or even a blue one, then it becomes very important to be able to use light here to create that separation, or else he would be kind of blending into that background. So that's something that helps a lot. And, there's all kind of different thoughts on the intensity of those edge lights. I typically tend to like a very harsh edge light versus a soft one. You can see again on top of his head that it's pretty harsh. And some people would use the term, hey, a backlight should be felt and not seen. And I'm like, no, a backlight should be seen. But that's for your preferences, your creativity to figure out how much light, backlight, edge light you like. And in some scenarios, I like some a lot softer than this. And in some others, I like them a lot harsher. And another way that people are starting to do it too is, instead of putting a backlight above like I have here, instead of putting it here, a lot of times they would use a tube light on the side that would create an edge a lot more to the side of the subject versus directly overhead. And so instead of this edge here, they would have a lot harsher edge all the way here and all the way down his arm. Which could look really nice. I've seen a lot of those that look really great. I don't carry tube lights with me on every project. Like, that's something I have to make a decision ahead of time and bring those with me. So I typically don't have that option unless, again, it's something that I consciously know I'm going to do ahead of time. So that's about it. That's a pretty simple interview setup. I think with a good understanding of exposure, a good understanding of lighting, some simple equipment, you should be able to get yourself out of any situation that a corporate environment throws at you and create some professional looking interviews. If you like and enjoy the content, don't forget to like the videos and subscribe to the channel. That's very helpful. I also have a free camera setting cheat sheet that you can download down below in the description. Feel free to grab that as well. And until next time, happy filming.